Hey everybody, welcome back into the studio. This is part 3 of Winter Filigree, and it's the final part. And this is the one that I loved doing the most because we get to do all that fancy detailing of the branches over the skyline. We'll also do some finishing up of some evergreens, and we'll also then finish up doing the cedars and all the cleanup and the pinion and all that fun stuff. We'll get to that. You'll see that in the video. Anyways, this is over a month worth of work. This 4-foot beast. Well, I had a little bit of a rib injury that cost me a little bit of time, but I'm feeling much better now. I can cint, paint without wincing and actually breathe deep, so that's always good. So why don't we, I was going to say get into the studio, but we're in the studio. So why don't we get to working and see how I finish this up? So we're finally at stage number 3, and this is the stage that I really enjoyed doing. It was the challenge I was looking for, is putting the thousands and thousands and thousands of tree branches over the skyline and making it look like a well-structured tree and giving it some depth, some form, and some warms and cools. So we'll finish up the tree line in this episode, then we'll finish off doing the evergreens down here in the bottom right. Then we'll just clean up a little left on the cedar on the left, and then we'll just go around the painting and do the last stage is what I like to call clean up and pinging. So we'll add some little shots of color here and there, whatever we need, and that's determined at the end when everything's filled in, and we can see how everything is working together. Okay, so in this episode, whenever I slow down and talk about the what I'm doing on the board, I will put up the power to paint key point. That way you'll know that I'm yapping, and you can, if you're scrolling through, you can stop and get the information you need. Okay, so let's get to it. Okay, so what I'm doing in this section is I've actually painted in the major, or well, blocked in the major tree here. And then what I'm doing is I'm creating the pattern of the background behind it. And why I did this is the part of the painting that's the furthest away from our viewpoint, okay? The left-hand side is where I photographed from the original reference. So the right-hand side is the furthest away from our view. So the detail is going to get less and less back there. So what I like to do is paint in whatever the major structure is in the foreground first, which is this tree, and it's only blocked in, and then paint in behind it and break up the background. This helps me make sure that the background isn't too busy, whereas if I painted the background first, I might get a little too detailed there and overpowering, make it a little too busy, and then when I put the tree, I paint the foreground tree on top of that, it would be really busy. So by painting the foreground tree first and then breaking up the background, we save ourselves that chance of repainting and downtoning because we did too much. Alright, so first of all, I'd like to apologize for the camera angle, but this thing was so big that I couldn't use my normal angled setup, so you will have to bear with me. But what I wanted to point out was the key here is you can see that I start with my major thick branches and then work my way down to the smaller branches. And as the text said earlier, as the branch gets closer to its end, you down the color and you make it softer. And what I mean by softer is you make the value a little closer to whatever the background is that it's going to be laid upon. And usually what I do is I'll take, like for instance, I used a black mixture to do the main trunks of the trees. Well, then I added a little bit of the background sky that it was going to be painted over into the black to soften it off and bring it just a little bit closer. So again, I just wanted to point out that when I do trees, I start with the big trunk, then go to the bigger main limbs that you can see, and I progressively work my way down to the smaller limbs. So that way you get the nice foliage look of the tree, okay? So here's a good example of how you change your paint color to accommodate what's actually going on in the painting. Right here, these trees are in front of the main light source, the highest, brightest, warmest light source. So what I've done is I've changed our trees to be a very orangey, bright, warm color. Okay, and as we get away from the main light source, this will become cooler and cooler and cooler. But right here, I wanted these very warm, very bright orange to signify that this is where the brightest light source is. So now that we've got quite a bit of the branching done, I want to bring your attention to the lighter background branches, the smaller branches. You can see how over here on the left-hand side, there are darker, cooler violet. And as I move closer to the light source, you can see that they're becoming warmer and more of a purple color. So you not only have to change the value or the contrast of your tree limbs as they get thinner, but you also have to change and accommodate the warmth of your branches as they get closer to your light source, okay? So remember, you gotta change your values to indicate the thicknesses of the branches, but you also have to change your warmth in your color to accommodate where they are according to the light source. At this stage, we start blending our colors down, and what I mean by that is I start blending the branches from the lighter colors down into the darkers, so we get that nice flow from thicker tree parts down to the thinner tree parts. So I know it looks like I might be jumping all over the place, but there is some method to my madness. What I'm doing here is I'm looking by section. And when I look at my reference, I'm looking at the open areas and then I'm working them up section by section. So what I mean by that is I'd look at this hollow in between these two trees, and I'm really trying to fill in the rhythms between there, and then I'd look at this section of the trees and fill in the rhythms there. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to create open spaces and then heavily branched spaces, and that helps give essence, if you will, to our trees and gives validity to our trees, because when you look through a very tree covered skyline, there's kind of open areas and then there's very dense areas where there's a lot of branching. So that's what you want to replicate here when you're laying in your branches. So at this stage, I'm just applying a few thin washes, and that's to soften areas that I want to soften, and also to reintroduce color where it might have got a little worked out of, and it just adds back in a little bit of that saturation and that intensity into the color. Up here in the left-hand corner, I'm about to do, I'm going to apply the bright orange here just to bring it up a little bit, and then also over top of these branches right here to soften them a little bit. So it has two different purposes. In some areas it's to bring back a little bit of color, and in other areas it's to soften the harsher, deeper, darker colors. Okay, so light washes are a great way of bringing life back into an area or to soften an area. Now, be cautious. Don't overdo this, and make sure your washes are very light and very thin. If you overdo it, you will muddy the painting and kill all that great detail work that you just spent hours doing. going to finish off the cedar. But before I do that, I just got to continue the forest that's on the right-hand side of the cedar through to the left-hand bottom corner here. So all I'm doing is putting in a couple of strokes just to indicate the same pattern that's behind the cedar tree on the right-hand side is continuing behind it, passing through to the left, okay? And that's just to add and continue a little bit of continuance in our background. And then you'll see, like right now, I'm taking the deep dark Mars blacks and I'm just cleaning up the edges, but that little bit of texturing was just so that we had the continuance of the forest that's behind the cedar tree. So I finish off this painting with a series of glazes. Right now I'm putting in a lot of violety glazes. These are just to soften some highlighted areas and bring a little more color back into the darker areas, so it doesn't look so flat and so dead. I mean, even though it's cool to contrast the nice warms, I still want to have a little bit of life in certain areas. So I just apply the washes until I'm happy with it, and again, extremely thin glazes. So here's the finished piece. So remember, it's like any other painting that I do. You always start blocking in, and then you build up your shapes and forms, and then you detail. So acrylic painting is layer after layer after layer after layer. Well, just even oil painting for that matter. When I do my oils, I do not change my process at all. It's the exact same process as when I do acrylics. So there's the final piece, Winter Filigree. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's been a long ride. Hope you learned lots. And until next time, everybody, stay safe, be good to each other, and happy painting.